Greetings and welcome to the Philosopher's Corner. As you may recall, I am Professor Hanson and I teach philosophy at several colleges here in Texas, although my degree is actually in the history of ideas. As you may also recall, I made a few videos about a year ago that I uploaded to YouTube, but I didn't feel that I got a lot out of the experience. As a matter of fact, it was somewhat difficult for me because I'm not really an outgoing person and it's not easy for me to sit here and make a video of myself. At the same time, I felt that many of the comments were vituperative without actually being helpful in terms of adding to the discussion. And so I took a bit of a hiatus, if you will. Nevertheless, I have been discussing ideas with Professor Anton, and he has been encouraging me to make another video. And recently he suggested I watch a series of videos that go by the name of Moving Naturalism Forward. Maybe you've seen some of them. After watching much of the videos and then talking about these kind of ideas with Professor Anton, I expressed to him that for the main part I had a problem with the terminology. In particular, there are two phrases that were used to denote the two main realms of interest, if you will, for these people in the discussion. On the one hand, there was what the physicists call the physical world, which I think we can understand straightforward enough as the world of physical science, the physics. But on the other hand, one of the problems that was being discussed here is how do we understand and how do we see the compatibility between our understanding of the physical world and our experience of normal consciousness, which in the discussion, in the videos, went by the name of the manifest image. Now, that phrase in particular is problematic for me because if we're talking about consciousness, whenever we use the word image, since our head, our brain produces our consciousness, it almost sounds as if we're talking about images in the head. And of course, there are no images in the head or in the brain. And so I wasn't comfortable with that phrase. At the same time, I have a set of terms that I got from a book that is very interesting. This book right here, it's called, as you can see, Visual Intelligence by Donald Hoffman. Donald D. Hoffman, it says, is professor of cognitive science, philosophy, and computer science at the University of California, Irvine. Lucky guy. Anyway, in here, Dr. Hoffman talks about what we see in two different ways. He says, on one hand, when we say, or when we talk about what we see, what we're talking about is something that would be contained in what the discussion was calling the manifest image. It's, for instance, if I talk about seeing this book, he says that we can talk about it in two different ways. On one hand, we can talk about it in terms of the book that we are actually seeing or experiencing. And he says that philosophers call this seeing in the phenomenal sense. And I think that's a good way of stating it. He says, on the other hand, however, that there is not just the book that we see, but there is actually, when we see something, some existing object, as he puts it, that we interact with. And he calls this seeing in the relational sense. So seeing in the relational sense is talking about what we see, but as, in a sense, the physical objects in the physical world of the physicists. Whereas seeing in the phenomenal sense is talking about what we see in terms of the manifest image. And so, personally, I can see how what we might call the relational sense and the phenomenal sense as better terms for what we're talking about, or at least enlightening terms with respect to the physical world and the manifest image. Personally, the terminology that I wanted to use was onticity, which comes from the Greek word ontos, a form of the word being or to be, because I felt that the world of the physicists is a world that exists physically, whereas the world that I experience in my consciousness is a fabrication of my brain. It's my personal experience, but it's not exactly what exists physically. But since I experience a world of objects, and the Latin res, or re as in reality, means object, I wanted to call the world of my experience reality. Professor Anton, however, explained to me that in the phenomenological view, and of course this is just my understanding of what he's saying. I don't know if I understand him correctly. I'm trying, but I'm kind of thick-headed and slow-witted, and I can only do my best. But the understanding that I gathered from Professor Anton was that just as my brain fabricates the reality of my personal experience, my brain also, in a sense, fabricates what we are, or in a sense, it fabricates our discussion of the physical world, and in that sense, fabricates the physical world. Now, I do believe that, for instance, if I see a pink elephant, that's something in my conscious experience, my conscious reality, but it's not something in physical reality. At the same time, if I see a tree that everybody else sees, I take it that that is something in my conscious reality, but I also take it that it is also something in physical reality. It's fermions and bosons, if you will. And this made me realize that although I, in a sense, can call my conscious experience reality, the physical world of the physicist is, in a sense, not different from that. And so it's a type of reality that my brain fabricates as well. And so now I have two realities, if you will. I have physical reality and conscious reality. But then I started thinking, even in conscious reality, we may be aware of other types of objects or other experiences that we want to set apart from physical reality and conscious reality. In part, what I'm talking about is something related to what Sir Karl Popper calls his three worlds. World one is the world of physical objects. That would include the fermions and bosons of the physicists, but also the physical bodies of living animals and things like that, so living creatures. World two, then, is the world of our conscious, what I'm now calling conscious reality. Right? So we have world one, physical reality, world two, conscious reality, and then Popper posits a third world. He calls it world three, which is the world of things created by human beings. Now, it includes physical objects, like all the sculptures, all the buildings, whatever human beings make. But it also includes all of the ideas that are important to human beings. And of course, even with respect to the physical objects, what is relevant for world three, as Popper calls it, is not the physical matter itself, but strictly speaking, the form. And since beyond the physical objects that we create, the ideas that we create are almost, strictly speaking, formal objects, I see Popper's world three as what I call formal reality. And so now I can see three different realities. Physical reality, the reality of the physical world. Conscious reality, the reality of my personal consciousness. And then finally, formal reality, which is the reality of mathematical objects, mathematical ideas, and forms in general. At the same time, this reminds me somewhat of the Neoplatonic terminology with respect to one of the hypostases. We don't need to get into all that detail, but the way Neoplatonists often describe what Plato's talking about is in terms of a series that they produce, which is existence, life, and mind. Right? And I can see that what I'm developing here is something similar to that. Existence, in a sense, would be just the physical world, almost Popper's world one, the world of the physics. But life is something different from mere physics. Something different goes on in life than mere physics, and I don't think that life is ultimately reducible. It's partly reducible, perhaps, but not totally reducible to physics. Okay? But that, for me, means that the world of living objects is another type of reality in itself. And so at this point now, I have 4 realities. And so to summarize and to give you an idea about what I'm talking about, I'd like to introduce an image here. Basically just a table description, where now we have, of course, on the top, physical reality. This is the reality where energy is particularly important, and it's the reality of course, the fermions and bosons. Next, we have biological reality, where the notion of teleology becomes important, in particular in terms of successful survival and successful reproduction. Now, you see that there is a dashed line between physical reality and biological reality, and that is because, for me, that implies that there is a connection such that biological reality may be at least partly reduced to physical reality. Beyond biological reality, then, we have, as you see, conscious reality. Here, the notion of intentionality, aboutness, is particularly important. But what is more important for this diagram here is the fact that the lines between biological reality and conscious reality are more developed, and in particular there is a solid line between conscious reality and biological reality. And for me, this indicates the fact that conscious reality is not reducible at all to biological or physical reality. Finally, then, of course, we have formal reality, where information is perhaps one of the most important ideas. Again, formal reality is separated from conscious reality by a dashed line, not because I think formal reality can be reduced to conscious reality, but because I think there's an intimate connection between formal reality and conscious reality. Now, to look at a little bit more of the details, first thing I want to point out is, of course, what we see here from top to bottom is a type of historical progression. According to science in general, the physical world comes into existence first. Then out of the physical world, eventually biological entities, living beings, emerge. Very quickly, but of course not at the higher levels, those living beings develop consciousness because they are assumed to be entities in an environment. They have to be aware of, or I should say, if they are aware somehow of objects in their environment, that will assist their teleological goals, survival and reproduction. So intentionality is extremely important here. Excuse me. And then after the emergence of conscious reality, which I take to be intimately connected with language, and of course language actually is a part of, at least merging into, formal reality, eventually we do see the emergence of formal reality, where human beings start to understand, in terms of mathematical objects, for instance, what we might call pure form. So looking at the details then, beginning with physical reality, this is the reality in which energy is extremely important. It is the reality of the physical forces, for which I use the Greek word phusis. We see this manifest in the force fields of the 4 forces: the gravitational force, the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. And 2 important ideas here are contiguity and isomorphism. Contiguity, the fact that 2 objects can be next to each other, derives from Pauli's what is known as the Pauli exclusion principle. It applies to fermions, which are things like electrons and electrons and quarks. And electrons and quarks are objects that cannot two of which cannot be in the same place at the same time. Therefore, they have to be next to each other, and this produces contiguity. Isomorphism, on the other hand, refers to similarities of structure. In particular, the fact that wherever we take a piece of space, if you will, it will have pretty much the same form. This is related somewhat to what is known as the cosmological principle in physics that says that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic. Homogeneous meaning no matter where you go in the universe, you're going to find the same kind of stuff, dark energy, dark matter, helium, hydrogen for the most part, and other things. And isotropic referring to the fact that no matter what way we turn, in general, the universe has the same appearance. And so it is, in a sense, isomorphic in its appearance. This is also, of course, the realm of physical necessity, the laws of nature, and one of the most important laws here is the law that produces entropy, and this is the second law of thermodynamics. This is a distinguishing feature of the physical reality. The next reality, of course, historically speaking, then would be biological reality. Here again, teleology is an important idea, and of course this is the reality of living creatures, of bios, of life. An important idea here is evolution, and evolution is cashed out here, as you see, in terms of the teleological goals here of homeostasis, which is to say maintaining the state of the individual, personal survival, and of course reproduction, the reproduction of the species, passing on are the characteristics of the individual to the offspring. Just as the physical realm is the realm of physical necessity due to the laws of physics, here, because of the way the evolutionary process works its way out, if you will, we have a little bit of freedom sneaking in here. And so I believe that this is a realm of physical freedom. And as I said earlier, this reality is partially, I believe, reducible to physical reality, but because of time irreversible processes which are necessary for life, but not necessarily necessary for the physical world, there is something that cannot be reduced here. The next reality then, of course, is conscious reality. Now, I have to admit I had a problem with the names of these. I thought maybe I would call this naive reality, but of course, we do use this reality to develop the physical reality, and so it is no longer, in that sense, naive. I thought I might call it personal reality, since it is the reality of each one of us. But I've settled on the term conscious reality simply because pretty much that's what we're talking about, consciousness, our knowing in general. Right? This is cashed out here, as you see, in terms of perception and language. Perception, I take it in a sense, is the first step in consciousness that allows us to form an experience of what ultimately we will see as physical reality and biological reality. Language then is introduced to address the higher levels of consciousness, higher, of course, being a metaphorical term, in which language produces self-consciousness and leads ultimately to the understanding of the next reality, the formal reality. Here we have the realm of logical freedom. And as I said earlier, I believe that consciousness is not reducible to either biological reality or physical reality. And then finally, of course, we have formal reality. This is probably the hardest reality to understand, but partly because it includes mathematics, but this is the realm, or the reality, if you will, where information becomes important. This is the reality where we focus in on form, and in particular, as you see here, what I call field forms. Now, this is a term taken from higher levels of mathematics, something known as modern algebra or algebraic structures, where we learn to construct fields. We create these forms that we call fields by using implication and equivalence, as you see here, to construct formal realities. Now, if you don't understand a lot about modern deductive logic, it's hard to understand what I'm talking about. But in general, this is the realm of, in a sense, just pure ideas. Ideas are types of forms, but we really need to understand formal logic in order to get at what I'm talking about here. There, when we do that, we will see what I mean by the logical necessity here. Right. And of course, I've included, as you see there, the notion of contradiction, because this is very important in helping us create our formal reality. That then is my take on the notion of the physical world, the manifest image, whether we call that the relational sense or the phenomenal sense. I think it's probably preferable to view them all, in a sense, on equal footing. And in fact, in closing, I would like to say that, of course, our primary or originary reality is our conscious reality, and this is thoroughly a social reality. In this context, I would recommend that you do what I did. As soon as I came to this realization, I read, or I should say reread, Chapter 3 of Professor Anton's first published book, Selfhood and Authenticity, which you see right here. Chapter 3 is on the social self. Let me get at the table of contents specifically here. The self through, as, with, for, against, as not others. And it's extremely informative in this respect. What I'm trying to say here is that social reality is the originary reality that produces our personal conscious reality, and historically we have gone on from there to recognize the other realities in terms, of course, of physical reality, biological reality, and then formal reality. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the video.